And this video is going over the directions for your disaster discussion post for our environmental health class. So for this particular discussion, what you're going to do is you're going to pick an environmental disaster that has occurred, and there's a list, and I'll show you that list in this video in a little bit. It's pretty extensive. And so you're going to pick an environmental disaster from the list provided, and you're going to look at what that event was, and then you're going to look at a couple of other people's and talk about how could it have been prevented, and what are some of the things that need to be done to remediate what's occurred. So in that list that's provided, there's a lot of options on there. Each topic on that list can only be used by one student. And so the way that I'm going to kind of let this run is that discussion post, you can go ahead and post on it. And so as you post on that, when you put your post in, that is going to claim that particular topic. So an example of this would be Chernobyl, would be a disaster that has to do with environmental health that we're going to look at, environmental disaster. And so with that Chernobyl, if one person does Chernobyl and puts the initial post in, no one else can do that. And that's the way it's claimed, is once the post is completed. So I do encourage you to work diligently once you start this. The first initial post shouldn't take too much extensive research on it, but go ahead and complete that, and also make sure that you're looking at the posts that have already been posted and the posts as they come in to make sure you're not repeating. Because you don't want to put all the work in and then have to go do something else because someone posted on there a couple days before and you just didn't look at it before you started. So for your initial post, what you're going to do is you're going to describe the event that occurred in detail and all the effects that it had on humans and on the environment. So with Chernobyl, you would describe the reactor melting down and how that released radiation, how that affected humans, short-term and long-term. There's a lot of things to look at there, and how that affects the environment. People still cannot live within a pretty good radius of the Chernobyl nuclear reactor. And so that's the initial post. After the due date for the initial post, you will then have your first response post due. So after everyone's posted on that, you're then going to have your first response that'll occur. And so you're going to go to another student's post. You're going to look at what their environmental disaster was, kind of learn about it for yourself. And then your response post will, what you're going to do is look at processes that could have been undertaken to prevent the disaster. So what are things that could have been done before this disaster occurred to prevent it? So again, using that Chernobyl one, could it have been the regulations on how it was built? Could it have been backup systems in place? Was it a faulty piece of equipment that wasn't inspected well? And in some of these, there may not have been precautions that could have been undertaken, but for the most part, all of these do have things that could have been done to help prevent. And sometimes that comes after the fact when we have more knowledge. So for that, you're going to pick one, and then realize for each initial post, only one person can do response one for that. So for each initial post, only one person can talk about the processes that could have been undertaken to help prevent that disaster. And so that way, every initial post will get that, and everyone's looking at it from a new perspective. So if one person's already done it, you need to move on to a different post. After the first response post is due, so they'll be due sequentially, the initial post first, and then about a week later, the first response. And then after that, you'll have a second response that'll be due. So you get about a week for each one of these. After that first response is due, you'll then start working on your second response. You will post a second response on another student's work. So you can't post on the same, you can't post on your initial post. You can't give a response to it. And you also cannot respond to the same person twice. So at the end of the day, you're going to be looking at 3 different environmental disasters as you respond to 2 different ones, and you have your initial post. And for that second response post, what you're going to do is you're going to be kind of detailing the actions that are needed to remediate the environmental and health impacts of the disaster. So these could be things that are needed if it's a more recent thing, or it could be things that have already occurred, or a combination of the two. So looking at the Chernobyl example, Um, Someone may have talked about what it was. The next person talked about the things that could have been done to prevent it. And then that third person is going to come in and talk about, well, these are the things that have been done in order to help clean the radiation. There's a thing called the sarcophagus that goes over the reactor that's helping to prevent radiation spread for the future. That is something that has occurred. But also we know that there is still more needed to help clean up the environment around that. So there's still a lot of radioactive soil where they pushed a lot of it. And so how would you remediate that, and what needs to occur? And also, what about all the people that have been affected over the last 30 to 40 years from that Chernobyl incident? And so again, with this one, only one response, second response per post. And so what that means is each initial post should have 2 responses from 2 different individuals. With this, make sure that you are using references in all of your posts: initial, first response, second response, in-text citation, so we know where they came from in the APA format. You're going to be gathering information from lots of places, depending on what the post is, and so we want to make sure that you give credit where that is due, and also connecting this back into our class of understanding environmental health. With that being said, if you guys have questions, please feel free to email. The list is also, you can access that pretty easily. It is kind of broken up into a couple of different categories in case you're interested in one over the other. I do tend to like looking at the nuclear style disasters a little bit more. They just intrigue me on the long-term effects. But you can look at a lot of these things, and some of them you may have never heard of. But it stretches back many, many years of things you can look for, from the bubonic plague to Chernobyl, I think, is on this list. The industrial ones have dates from 1912 all the way to things like 2018 or 2015, just looking at different landslides that have been caused, or China's built a lot of dams, and so there's been a lot of environmental things that have come from that. You've got mining ones that you can look at. Oil industry has had their fair share of environmental things. So just kind of looking at those and as they go through. And then you've got a couple of nuclear ones here, and also some air, land, and marine ones. So really whatever you're interested in, there should be one. So you're going to pick one of these to start with your initial post, and then you're going to be responding to people's that have chose other ones. Remember, each one of these can only be used once, and there's no fear of us running out. There are plenty more of these than there are of you in this class. So here's the discussion post. Again, you can post them as Word documents, or you can just put the text in. You also have access to the rubric here that you guys can click on and see kind of how you're graded. If you have any questions, please let me know. Look at your syllabus for the due dates for those types of things. And I hope you guys enjoy this assignment.